Spoiler warning. I know this game is 2 years old now, but there are spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played it, just be aware that there are spoilers.
What's this?
Some folks call this thing here a guitar.
Funny.
You want to hear something?
Okay.
Okay. Promise me that you won't laugh.
I won't laugh. I won't.
I'm trusting you. If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I've not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts I've no need for any more, 'cause I believe, and I believe 'cause I can see our future days, days of you and me.
So it's been 2 years since The Last of Us Part 2 came out, and for a while I was a bit back and forth on this game. Part of me loved it and part of me hated it, but I think I finally understand the game now. Just to get this out of the way quickly, this isn't technically speaking a rewrite. I don't personally think the game needs it. This is more of how I think the game should have and probably would have gone, judging by the trailers and what we were shown before the game's release. But before we get into that, I might as well talk about what I liked and didn't like about the game. Not so much an in-depth review, but just what I think of the game as a self-proclaimed Last of Us expert. Firstly, the gameplay compared to the first game is incredible. It's a million times more interactive, and while the first game was a bit of a challenge just because of the bad gunplay, the second game's gunplay is extremely smooth and 10 times easier. It's still a bit of a challenge, but I'm proud to say that in my first playthrough of the game I only died a handful of times. The narrative is solid, not as good as the first games, but still enjoyable. However, the only complaints I have being the structure and pacing of everything. To explain what I mean a bit better, after Joel's death you play as Ellie for around 10 to 12 hours hunting Abby. Then out of nowhere, Abby ambushes our heroes, kills Jesse, who is immediately forgotten despite being the best supporting character in the entire game, and just as tensions seem to get higher...
He did what he did to save me. There is no cure because of me. I am the one that you want. Just let him go.
You killed my friends. We let you both live.
And you wasted it. Dad?
We cut to Abby, and we learn through a flashback, more on those in a minute, that Abby's father was the doctor who was going to develop the cure until Joel killed him. This wouldn't be so bad if we then didn't have to play another 10 hours as Abby. In all fairness, she does have some of the best set pieces, but we just spent so much time hating her only to be forced to try and sympathize with her and play as her until almost the end of the game. Not to mention that all of Abby's friends we kill as Ellie, we see more of as Abby. But then it's too late to get to know them because we just know that they die later in the timeline anyway, but more on that in the rewrite segment of the video. Going back to the subject of flashbacks, while the flashbacks are good and describe what happened in the 4 years before part 2, I don't know about any of you, but they just pulled me right out of the moments. I just felt like they should have been most of the game. The comedy in this game is fantastic, some of my favourite moments being...
Some folks call this thing here a guitar.
I heard you had quite a night after I left.
She kissed me. It was just Dina being Dina. She didn't mean anything by it.
I was talking about your fight with Seth. Wait, you kissed Dina?
Oh.
Ow! What the fuck? I'm not even playing! Cause you're a chicken? You're a chicken!
I hate this kid so much. You wanna fuck him up? Yeah, I do.
Smash Brandy's cooch.
just to name a few, all from the first few hours of the game as well. The acting is the best I think I've ever seen in a video game before, adding to the immersion. Ashley Johnson and Laura Bailey fucking killed it in this game, and the chemistry Ellie has with all of the characters is incredible, especially with Joel of course. The music is, Italian kiss. Just listen to this track from the beginning of the game, aptly named Unbroken. You can even find the composer Gustavo Gustavo chilling in the middle of Jackson playing on his banjo. I also just love the amount of detail in this game, from guts and blood flying everywhere to veins showing in Ellie and Abby's arms. The game does a lot of good visual storytelling too, such as the bookends. The game opens with a shot of the moth on the guitar, and the game ends with the moth on the guitar and Ellie walking in the distance, showing her moving on from Joel. When Ellie finds Abby, she's shocked at what she has become, and she hesitates when Abby picks up Lev because I think she's realizing that her and Joel aren't that different from Abby and Lev. It's a bit on the nose, but I still love that detail, and probably my favourite detail, one I didn't even notice until recording gameplay for this video, is that the menu screen when you finish the game is a boat on the shore of Catalina Island, with a dome building in the background. And I originally thought that this was just the Rattler's base, but it's where the Firefly told Abby to go before they got captured, so this is showing that Abby and Lev found them after 2 years. To be honest, I never liked Abby. I felt her side of the story was forced, though I liked the Rat King and all the stuff with Lev and Yara, but after writing the script for this video, she's grown on me quite a bit. She's a good character. She only got hate because she killed Joel. Yeah, she is a bit of a psycho, and his story does kind of suck, but she does have an arc, so to speak, and I think it's a fitting one. To cap off the review portion of this video, I think The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the most compelling and immersive games I've ever played. And while it's not as good as the first one, it's a solid sequel, and I think people hating the game and sending out death threats to the actors and writers just because they killed off Joel in the first couple hours is ridiculous. While we're on that subject, when the game first came out, I remember the main complaint being that Joel didn't die a heroic death and he died way too early. But let me just remind you, this is The Last of Us, not the Marvel movies. Like we learned multiple times in the first game, this world is cruel, and people can be taken from us brutally and with no warning at any moment. I applaud the game for having the guts to kill him off so early, because that is very realistic for this world. I managed to avoid every spoiler for this game when it was coming out, and I wasn't actually pissed when he died. I was more or less expecting it, because again, this is The Last of Us. Not to mention that Joel isn't a hero, he's a terrible person. In the first game we learned that in the 20 years between Sarah's death and him meeting Ellie, he and Tommy did some terrible things to survive. Things that traumatized Tommy, so much so that he told Joel he never wanted to see him again. He shuts himself off from everyone and has no problem murdering anyone in his way and, of course, the Firefly Hospital. Before you say, what Joel did was justified because the Fireflies were inept, they didn't know what they were doing. Firstly, yes, I agree, that they are dumb. They are shown constantly having their asses handed to them, and one of their only doctors managed to infect himself by experimenting with monkeys. But that doesn't excuse Joel murdering like 100 Fireflies. That's ridiculous. Secondly, Joel would have done what he did regardless of how useless the Fireflies were, and we're shown countless times that that is just the kind of person he is. And thirdly, he lies to Ellie about it, telling her that the Fireflies never needed her, and that her immunity, and by extension her life, meant nothing. And in doing so, tells her that all of the loss that she's experienced, Riley, Tess, and Sam, was also for nothing. Their deaths meant nothing. Yeah, this guy definitely deserves the world love and adoration. Now don't get me wrong, Joel is a great protagonist, one of my favourites in gaming. His selfishness is what makes him so interesting in my opinion, but even I know he's terrible, and yeah, his death was a bit brutal, but that was just his past catching up to him to make him pay for all the blood he'd spilt over the years. Now that that's out of the way, to reiterate, this isn't technically a rewrite, this is more of how I think the story should have and probably would have gone based off of the trailers and gameplay we were shown prior to the game's release. Before we start, I just want to say that I've poured hours into this script. This rewrite has gone through many drafts over the last few years, and even this one I feel doesn't hold a candle to either games, but this is the one that makes the most sense to me. This is all my opinion, so if you disagree, please be nice about it in the comments. I also quickly just want to say again, I think the original game's narrative is great. The only issue I have is the structure and pacing. If the game absolutely had to be told in the way that it was, the only thing I'd change is that after Joel's death, when you play the Seattle days, start day 1 as Abby, people would be pissed but would get introduced to all the characters in one place properly before they die, then day 1 is Ellie, day 2 is Abby, day 2 is Ellie, and then day 3 as Abby ends with her going to the aquarium and finding Owen and Mel. Then she sees the map and it ends with her looking at Lev with rage in her eyes, and then day 3 is Ellie and the rest plays out the same. That being said, let's start the rewrite. So to begin, I'm going to change the intro. I love the original game's intro, but most of the people who are playing the game are already familiar with the ending of the first, so the little recap isn't necessarily needed. But what I am keeping in is the flashback that reveals Abby's motivations. This is mainly so this isn't just thrown at us in the middle of the game later, and also just foreshadow what happens. I'm going to take a page out of Jacksepticeye's review of the game here. After that flashback, we cut to the flashback of Ellie's birthday, so we can establish how much living in Jackson has completely changed Joel and how his shell has broken off thanks to Ellie. And everything here is pretty much the same up until the shuttle scene. Maybe throw in a Fireflies reference beforehand, but in the shuttle, Ellie's listening to the cassette, the voiceover and it begins to count down, the noise ramps up, we hear a subtle knocking in the background. And then we smash cut to Ellie waking up 3 years later. Except this isn't the morning after the party, it's the night of. It's still Jesse knocking and he's with Tommy this time. They walk through the town and briefly show that since the first game, Ellie is more comfortable around Tommy now, and then the party scene happens, and it ends the same way, with Ellie yelling at Joel for shoving Seth. Only more tame this time, as in my rewrite, Ellie doesn't fully know about what happened at the hospital yet. She's still suspicious, but afterwards she has a look of regret. And then we get introduced to Abby the next morning. Her introductory section is more or less the same. Her and Owen are discussing what they're going to do and imply that they're looking for someone. Obviously Joel. I don't know why they tried to hide this fact in the original game, but they don't find Jackson this time. They're just chilling in the cabin or something. Ellie goes on patrol, except she's with Tommy this time. They have their bonding moments, deal with infected and such, and then we get to the blizzard scene, and Ellie and Tommy get separated. After a minute of searching for him, she finds some horse tracks and we cut back to Abby. She's in the cabin with the others when they get a knock on the door and it's Tommy. He apologizes for the intrusion and asks to stay to wait out the storm, and that his companion will find them shortly. Abby agrees and politely asks where he's from. When he replies Jackson, she recognizes the name and asks if she knows a Joel, as she's been looking for him for a few years. Tommy, sensing something's wrong, tells them that he's Joel in order to protect his brother, and they all pounce on him immediately. This plays out the same way as when they captured Joel in the original game, except this time it's Tommy. We cut back to Ellie and she has found the cabin. She goes inside to look for Tommy and after a minute finds a closed door with hitting and grunting sounds behind it. She opens it to find Abby torturing Tommy, blood everywhere. Ellie pulls her gun to shoot her but is tackled by Abby's friends and pinned down. She begs Abby to stop but she keeps going, and we get the scene of her friends arguing. Owen comes in and tells Abby to end it now before more come, and after a few more seconds of Ellie pleading, Abby kills Tommy. Ellie is knocked out and shortly after is awoken by Dina. We see Tommy dead on the floor. I realize that killing Tommy is almost as risky as killing Joel, but we can use the excuse that he just wanted to see why they were looking for Joel. Also, Tommy didn't have a major purpose in this rewrite, even if we did put someone in his place, because this version of the story is way more focused on Joel and Ellie, more so than the original game. So we cut back to Jackson. Ellie's in her room. She gets a knock at the door and she opens it to see Joel. Ellie hugs him and apologizes for not being able to save Tommy. Joel tells her not to be sorry, that she tried and it's gonna be okay. Joel is upset, but he's still trying to make sure Ellie's okay first. Joel asks her if she saw or heard anything that would tell them where they came from, and Ellie says that she remembers hearing something about Seattle. When she asks why, Joel tells her that he's going after them. He says he regrets not being a better brother to Tommy in the early days of the outbreak, and that he's doing this to make up for it. Ellie says she'll go with him, saying that he'll need all the help he can get. Joel tries to argue, but he knows she'll just come anyway. The next morning, Joel is standing by Tommy's grave, and we pan to just outside the graveyard where Ellie is standing waiting for him. Dina approaches from the side, and they exchange words for a moment. Ellie tells her that she doesn't have to come if she doesn't want to. Her and Joel could handle it by themselves, and Dina tells her that if Ellie goes, she's going too. We establish that Maria is letting them go because she wants revenge for Tommy but can't leave because someone has to take care of Jackson. The gang gets ready to leave and then we cut to black. Text fades in saying Seattle Day 1. We're playing as Abby. Her and her friends are in a truck driving back to Seattle. Abby's in the back, an angry look on her face. Owen notices this and asks her what's wrong, to which Abby replies that something felt off about what happened. Owen asks if she thinks they may have gotten the wrong Joel, and Abby says she doesn't think so, and Owen says it was probably just because she's been waiting so long and it hasn't hit her yet. So this is where the differences start to stop for the most part. Abby's story plays out mostly the same up until the theatre scene, so I won't talk about her much. As for Ellie, Day 1 is the same. Her, Dina, and Joel are trying to find Abby and her friends, explore downtown Seattle, find a bunch of the WLF dead. They find one runaway WLF member and convince them to tell them where Abby is. But they don't know, so just tell them to look for Nora at the hospital, and are chased by a horde into the theatre. Dina is feeling weak. Joel says he's going to look around the theatre to make sure it's secure, and Dina and Ellie talk, where she reveals that she's pregnant. Ellie angrily storms off. She finds the WLF radio and finds Joel in the stage room playing guitar. She walks over and sits close to him. They reminisce about when they got back to Jackson and the first guitar lesson Joel ever gave Ellie. Ellie's demeanor drops slightly and we get a quick flash of the hospital. Joel notices and asks if she's okay. She says it's nothing, and Joel, trying to distract her, starts playing a familiar song. Future Days. The first song he ever sang to her. The day ends with Joel saying they should get some rest. Ellie's next day begins with Dina using the radio, and Ellie apologizes for getting angry at her, and Dina says she got the radio working, and because she's not feeling well she's going to stay behind and listen to the radio, and they agree to stay in contact via walkie-talkie. Joel's still resting, so Ellie tells Dina to tell him that she's gone for info and she'll come back when she knows something so they can go after Abby together. So Ellie goes off on her own, and it's all the same. She goes through Hillcrest and is getting chased by a very large group of WLF until she gets grabbed by someone off screen and is held behind a wall for a few minutes. Once they're gone, she turns around and sees Jesse. She asks what he's doing here, and he replies with, "Do you think I just let you do this on your own?" Just quickly before I continue, I know I said I'm basing this rewrite off the trailers, and in the trailer it's Joel that says this, but I couldn't find a way to get Joel to have this moment, so I'll keep it as Jesse. They escape in the truck and crash into a lake after being chased by WLF as well as infected. But instead of them going straight to the theatre and then Ellie goes back out again, they're still being chased by WLF, so Jesse tells her to continue to the hospital and he'll try and draw them away. Ellie tells her that Dina and Joel are at the theatre, so to go there when he loses them, and they split up. The rest of the day goes the same. She goes through the Seraphite Forest. Up until this point, we haven't seen them as they normally are. As Abby, the only scars we really see are Yara and Lev, and scars as they're chasing them through Seattle, and in the buildings when Abby and Lev are going to the hospital. Anyway, she goes through the Seraphite Forest, reaches the hospital, and all that's mostly the same. She chases Nora and pushes her into the clicker nest, and then we get the hallway scene. Nora tells Ellie that he deserved it because of what he did at the hospital. Ellie asks what she means, and Nora replies, "You don't know? He killed at least 100 fireflies. The doctor who was going to make a cure, and Marlene." Ellie is struck for a minute. She's been suspicious for a while. Even now, she's still unsure and just asks where Abby is again. Nora says she's not giving her up, so Ellie beats her with a pipe, and we cut to black as a strike lands. We cut back to the theatre, and Ellie is covered in blood, and she bangs on the door with a shaky hand. Dina, Joel, and Jesse open it and are shocked. They try asking what's wrong. Ellie just says she's at the aquarium, and then immediately turns to Joel, who just hugs her. He says he's been worried sick and that he couldn't come because Dina wouldn't tell her where she was, and Ellie just pushes him away. After a short moment, Ellie says, "Tell me what happened at the hospital. If you lie to me one more time, you will never see me again. But if you tell me the truth, we'll go back to Jackson." And Joel, taken aback, takes a moment to collect himself and says, "Making a vaccine would have killed you. So I stopped him." Ellie starts to break down. Joel tries to comfort her, but she pushes him away and tells him, "We'll kill Abby, and I'll go back to Jackson with you, but we're done." She storms off and locks herself in the office with the radio. Abby's day 3 happens, and it ends with Abby finding Owen and Mel and finding the map, but we don't see what happens next, as we cut to black immediately. Ellie's day 3 starts and she goes downstairs but can't find anyone. She finds Joel's bag. All she finds is his journal and the watch that Stara gave him 25 years ago. Her face of anger suddenly turns to sympathetic. She's angry at Joel for what he did, but she understands. Dina and Jesse enter saying they can't find him. Jesse says he must have gone out to the aquarium to finish this on his own. Ellie realizes that he doesn't plan on making it back alive because he left his watch behind. So her and Jesse go off together. They have a bunch of bonding moments and they deal with Infected and WLF together until they get to the aquarium. They go in together and realize Joel isn't here yet, so Jesse says he'll go back outside and wait for him. Ellie goes through the aquarium and finds Owen's Firefly tag, then him and Mel. She asks where Abby is, and this scene plays out the same. She tries to get Mel to point out on the map, and Owen grabs her and gets shot. Mel is stabbed. Owen tells Ellie that Mel's pregnant, and Ellie breaks down again, struggling to breathe. Joel and Jesse come in and they quickly leave together, leaving the map behind. Back at the theatre, and Ellie's sat alone and Jesse sits with her. He tells her that it's okay and comforts her. They have the nice moment from the original game and then Joel comes over. Jesse leaves to give them a moment. They have the conversation that they do on the porch in the flashback at the end of the original game, where Ellie says that she was supposed to die in that hospital because it would have given her life meaning. And he took that from her. Joel says that if he had another chance, he'd do it again. Ellie responds by saying, "I just don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But when we get back to Jackson, I would like to try." Joel tells her that that's all he wants, and walks away to fetch his bag. Ellie finds Dina to tell her that they'll rest and head out for Jackson in the morning. They hear a bang in the lobby, so Ellie runs to investigate. She opens the door and a bullet flies at her but just misses. Ellie ducks behind a desk and has barely any time to react before Abby orders her to stand up, which she does, only to see Jesse on the floor, Abby's gun to his head and leveled at her side, both at the ready. After a brief exchange where Abby tells Ellie that she let her live only to waste it, she lifts her gun at Ellie and Jesse tries to tackle her, but Lev shoots him in the knee, knocking him down, and Abby shoots at his head, but he doesn't kill him this time, but we don't know this yet. Ellie shoots at them and Abby chases her through the theatre, and we get that fight scene from the original game because it's fucking great. We play as Abby and it goes the same way. She beats Ellie, breaks her arm, and she's knocked to the floor, barely able to move, and Joel comes in and attacks Abby. They fight for a few moments. Joel slices her up, stabbing her in the knee multiple times, but Abby ultimately beats Joel as well, breaking his leg. After a brief exchange, Abby realizes that it's Joel and grabs a pipe sticking out of the wall and starts just beating him with it. Ellie pleads and pleads her to stop. Joel tells Abby just to kill him already because she's proven her point. And she says, "Joel Miller, you stupid old man. You don't get to rush this." Dina rushes her and tries to knife her too with a shot in the shoulder by Lev, and she's knocked out. Abby stands back up and prepares for one more devastating blow, Ellie crying and begging Abby to stop, but she brings the pipe down, crushing Joel's skull. I know this is still brutal, but like I said before, this is The Last of Us, and it's not like Joel didn't deserve this. We barely have any time to react to this because Abby grabs Dina and holds a knife to her throat in front of Ellie. Ellie tells her that she's pregnant and Abby just replies, "Good." But before she can kill Dina, Lev just yells her name. Abby looks at him for a moment and just pushes her back to the ground alive. Abby stands over Ellie and says, "Don't ever let me see you again." Once she leaves, Ellie crawls over to Joel and cries and just holds him for a minute. We fade to black. I know I complained earlier about not getting enough Joel, and this rewrite hasn't had a lot of Joel either, but in my head this version of the game has a lot more Joel doing stuff. I'm just speeding through this to save time, and just to give an idea of the story outline. Obviously if the story did go this way, we get loads of Joel in the gameplay. But anyway, now we're on the farm, 2 years later. Except I'm going to do something a little ballsy here. This is where the game's going to end. No Santa Barbara, just a quiet, bittersweet ending. Ellie and Dina are living together with Dina's baby. But for a nice bit of comedy, Jesse is also living there as a third wheel to help look after the baby. Except he's blind and slightly unable to walk like Tommy was at the end of the original game. We get pretty much the same PTSD flashback from the original game Ellie has about Joel. Instead of Tommy coming to ridicule Ellie, it's Maria. She tells her that she's been asking traders from all over who visit Jackson, and she's finally found a lead in Santa Barbara. The whole Santa Barbara thing is still the idea that the Fireflies are there, so that's why Abby and Lev are going there.
We're done with that.
Maria says that she can't go because she can't leave Jackson without a leader, so asks Ellie to go. Then the same argument ensues and Maria says something about Joel and Tommy dying for nothing if they're not going to do anything about it. Ellie sits there silently as Maria, Jesse, and Dina continue to argue. Later that night, Ellie is awake and everyone else is asleep. She goes downstairs and picks up her guitar and plays Future Days. We get quick flashes of all the nice moments between her and Joel, the giraffe scene from the first game, the birthday scene, and the Jackson scene where Joel sang to her. We cut to shortly after and Ellie is packing her bags and Dina walks in. They have an argument about Ellie going, and they break up. Ellie walks out, alone. The camera slowly pans up as we watch Ellie walk off into the distance, vengeance fueling her mind. End credits. I know that this is still controversial for a bunch of reasons, but I still think that this would be a very solid sequel. Now, I'm not a professional writer, so if Naughty Dog themselves used this outline, it would be done better, but this is just my opinion, and I'd like to know how you change the narrative too. Now, this version of the story would obviously lead into a part 3, more focused on revenge. This one was more or less just setting everything up to be that way, and setting up characters like Dina and Jesse, so if they died in part 3, then it would be a bit more impactful. I don't have an outline for a part 3, but it would probably be fairly short, shorter than in part 2 at least. Ellie is chasing Abby as she and Lev are tracking down the Fireflies to honor Owen. I'd like if the game had to make Abby and Ellie team up for some reason. I think it would be a nice parallel, and I'd like for the game to end how part 2 did, with Ellie letting Abby go so she can finally forgive Joel. Her and Lev finally find the Fireflies and Ellie ends up alone. Although in part 2, we don't know how alone she is, because in the final scene, she doesn't have any guns and she has Dina's bracelet, implying that she went back to Jackson after letting Abby go. And then as Ellie finally realizes just how much Joel meant to her and how he would never wanted Ellie to go after Abby for him in the first place, she's left alone. But she's finally able to forgive Joel and let him go. A nice detail I want to throw in here is that she's wearing the watch that Sarah gave him, as a metaphor for how Joel will always be a part of her, despite everything that he did. So, yeah. My rewrite is still a little bit off even after 2 years. I think the original game is better than what I have here, but this is what makes the most sense to me in terms of doing the game differently. If this is how the original game went, I imagine people would still have a lot of negative things to say about it, but this is just how I think it would have gone just by what was shown in the trailers. This is all my opinion, so if you disagree, tell me how you would have written the game. Like I said before, Last of Us Part 2 is a great game and does not deserve any hate it gets by any stretch of the imagination. I do hope we get a part 3 eventually, and when part 1 comes out in September, I'm going to be streaming it, potentially doing a series on it, so stay tuned if you'd like to be a part of that, and I hope to see you there. If at any point you enjoyed this video, it'd mean a lot to me if you could like and subscribe. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you soon.